Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is your host, Warisa Zainab. Welcome to Agahi with another fantastic episode. Today we have a very special guest, Mary Wride, who will be joining us all the way from France. And Mary Wride is a mother, a coach, a survivor of domestic abuse. And she has also written this amazing book that I'm going to talk about further in this show today. Mary, welcome to Agahi.
Yes, thank you for inviting me, Marissa. I'm really pleased to be here.
So I was reading some of your work and I was truly touched by it. I found it really inspiring. And before we discuss what you have written in your book, I would like you to tell me something about your background, a little bit of introduction so that our audience know who you are as a person and what motivated you, what inspired you to write these amazing poems.
Right. Well, I'm currently retired and living in the southwest of France. I joined my career in financial services, really. I joined around about the age of 17 and I was very lucky to fall into work within that field that I really enjoyed, which was personal and organisational development. My job took me all around the world, and more recently I was living and working in the Middle East. That was a fantastic, I guess, highlight to my career. Such a diverse region, so much to learn from people. And one of the things I guess I'm most proud of in my time with my time in the Middle East was running a women's development program for 300 women. Wow. which was great. So I've always enjoyed working with women during my career.
Is there a special reason for that, Mary?
Well, I think, I'm very passionate about women, and I guess when I started out, it was a long time ago, and careers were very hard to forge in those days. We were prohibited from doing all sorts of things, becoming managers, getting promoted. So I had to fight my way up through the ranks, as it were. So there's always that thing as a woman, I think, that you want to help other women where you can, and help to give them the encouragement to feel more empowered, really.
Right. And I'm curious to know what made you decide to write a book on growing up in a violent household, because not everyone has the courage to speak about their experiences and share it with the wider public.
Yeah, I mean, it was a strange thing, really, Warissa. It was the start of the COVID outbreak in March 2020, and here in France we were pretty much put into a fairly strict lockdown. And I was spending quite a bit of time on my own here in the house. And I started listening to the news, and in the news, two words came up, which were a big moment for me. And it was about the shadow pandemic. Yeah. And the shadow pandemic was really saying that, there were women and children who were suffering during this period by being, if you like, locked up with partners who were difficult and dangerous, and that whereas women might have got out of the home and gone to work and been able to live some sort of normal life, of course being locked up with somebody who is difficult and dangerous, is a real problem. And that really, I saw that women were 40% rise in calls to helplines, women fleeing home, and it took me right back. It took me right back to being a child, being trapped in a home like that, and particularly it really raised a lot of feelings about my mum, because I wasn't abused at home, but my mum was the victim of a lot of coercive control and domestic abuse. So that really was what prompted me to really go back to a place that I'd tried to put aside, if you like.
And October is known as the month of spreading awareness about domestic abuse. So I thought this would be a fantastic opportunity to have someone on board who's not only a victim, was a victim and a survivor, but also found healing on this journey. And I think this is a very important aspect of experiencing something like this, because most of us, I think, we struggle when it comes to healing, to acknowledge what's happened. That's, I think, the first step to recovery. So
Yeah.
tell me something about your book. What does it talk about?
Well, it really just, it was a personal journey. It was how I went from, I guess, that moment of thinking about my mum and thinking about the shadow pandemic. And I actually was wondering, what is it that I can do? Because I felt a need as a woman, a mother, to say, hey, this isn't okay.
Yeah.
And how would I do that? What would I do? So there was allowing myself to just sort of think about, I guess I was using my mind and sort of trying to work it out. And there was something about just letting go of my mind and sort of settling more into my body and being prepared to go to the feelings, if you like, that I'd been hiding from, because I knew that in all these years I'd been hiding from those past feelings. And there was one actually right at the very start of my book. Can I just read you the very first paragraph?
Yes, of course. Yes, please.
So here's the statement that came to my mind, and this is what really got me started. In the silence, they are screaming to be found. I can hear them rattling their chains behind locked doors. And if I listen carefully, somewhere deep inside my soul, I am being offered a key. I take it. I sink into the shadows, looking for the missing parts of me. But when I finally emerge, I have blood on my hands. Now, you need to read the rest of the story to know where it was going. But,
giving me goosebumps already.
But that feeling of sinking into my body and saying, okay, Mary, it's okay to go there, because this is stuff that if you really want to help people, you're going to have to work with. And so therefore I allowed myself to start to listen to my intuition, to listen and try and find the sort of the young Mary, the inner child, if you like, that had been so wounded. And that's where I decided that I would go. And of course that ended up being being a very emotional journey, but one that was very worthwhile.
And on this journey, Mary, did you come across a lot of women like you who have had similar experiences like you did?
Well, yes, I mean, it's not unusual to, in fact, there's more women that are suffering in silence behind closed doors, whether it's rich, middle class or poor. There is a lot going on behind closed doors that we don't see, and there's a lot that women keep hidden. And really, I'm delighted right now that the conversation is opening up to what is it that is happening to women, indoors and outdoors, and what responsibility do men really need to take for their own behavior, if you like.
Yes. Talking about behavior, as a child, children often fail to understand why a certain parent is behaving in certain manner, because a child's cognition is not fully developed to understand and comprehend the behavior of adults or the caregivers. So growing up in a violent household, Mary, what was life like? How did you cope?
Well, it's a strange thing, because what would happen is I never really knew, or none of us knew what would happen. I guess there's a big element of uncertainty, because if you live with an abuser, and I referred to my father in the book as a predator. If you live with an abuser, you don't really know who's going to walk in the door in the evening. It could be somebody walking in with a box of chocolates and a smile on his face, and then the next day it could be somebody walking in the door and walking in and slamming the door and, you know, going straight up to his bedroom and banging things around.
Yeah.
And therefore, there's an awful lot of uncertainty. And so you're very quickly trying to adapt to somebody else's behavior. And I think that's what's so controlling about it, is that there is a controlling element, which is that you are controlling, you are responding to how they are, and you are changing your behavior in relation to that. When, you know, when the abuser is up, you're up. When they're down, then you're down. And so that, you know, it was adjusting all the time, making the most of the good times and being very fearful in the bad times. And also I realized that I very, very quickly picked up the role as rescuer for my mum. So in some ways there was, you know, my dad the perpetrator, my mum the victim, and me the rescuer. So in the rescuer mode, you know, I was sort of putting my needs a lot to one side and trying to be the friend, the protector, the listener, the everything that, you know, I thought my mum needed. And actually that was quite a lot. With hindsight, that was a lot to take on at a very young age. And it meant that really I buried a lot of whatever was happening to me. Let's say if I was being bullied at school or there was something not working in my life, I didn't deal with it because I was so busy trying to look after my mum, really.
Yeah. So from an early age, you become like a caregiver almost, because you feel you have a responsibility of looking after somebody who is a vulnerable person, but at the same time, you also feel that you must do something in this situation to intervene and help, although you're also putting your life and yourself at risk at the same time, because this perpetrator could also harm you or become aggressive towards you. So you spoke about fear. Do you think that was something easy to get over with in your adulthood, Mary?
No, I think that's something, you know, we carry. You know, I'm still a fearful person, or I don't look it on the surface. And I think, you know, that's the, I've had a professional career. I think people think I'm strong and capable, and, you know, I can problem solve and take a lot of responsibility. But, you know, deep down, what I always knew was I was protecting that inner child, if you like, and that inner child was really, really fearful and really, really vulnerable. And, you know, I don't think as an adult that you let go of that. I think you carry that fear. I remember I know that, for example, you know, I was holding my body, holding my stomach tightly, holding my shoulders, holding a lot of my body in a way that always really was around, you know, you're protecting something. You know, and I did write the early part of the book, I wrote a few verses called Dungeon, which talked to the fear, and I wondered whether you wanted me to just read out.
Please, that would be fabulous.
A few of those verses. I think it maybe answers a bit of the question about, you know, why the fear is sort of still around as an older person. So this first little poem was called Dungeon, and it starts, "The nights are long, they never end. There's only foe, there is no friend. We are not safe and must endure a curse for which there is no cure. Terror hangs in every room. In silence, I can feel the gloom. A noise, the panic in my heart. A drama is about to start. For evil roams this house for sure. It prowls round every creaking door. Sometimes it crashes, screams and scares. Sometimes it tiptoes up the stairs. I lie in dread throughout the night. I clench my body up real tight. I curl myself into a ball. I make myself so very small. I tell you now, it's not a lie. I thought that we were going to die. In our home and in our beds. Oh, how that messes with our heads. A monster lives, it snarls and gloats. It puts its claws up to our throats. our voices strangled, held within. It's clear that we belong to him.
Wow, that was really powerful. Thank you for that, Mary.
And can I tell you something a little bit about why the verse?
Please.
When I was thinking about how was I going to talk about this, I was thinking with my strategic mind. And then when I was out, I was in that sort of space of wanting to say something. And while I was out in nature and walking and doing the garden, all of a sudden, these verses started to come to me. And I had to grab my phone and I had to speak into my phone recorder because I was out walking and I didn't have anything. And then when I was at home, I had my pad and I was scribbling these things down. And what it was because I'd allowed myself to sort of go more into my body, I felt that my inner child wanted to speak to me, but she wanted to speak in a different way. She wanted to speak in rhyme. She wanted to express herself differently. And because I allowed that to come, it meant that I was actually going back there and almost speaking from that childhood experience.
And how long ago was that?
That what the actual experience, or when? Oh, well, that's over 50 years ago now.
Only 55 did you say?
Over 50 years ago.
Wow.
When I would have been feeling this, you know. And so to go back there and be able to experience it and say it in verse, and it was the verse that I knew that was the young me wanting to speak, because the older me will only speak using you know, the sort of strategic mind and not actually going to the feelings place, if you like.
So what other psychological effects did it have? You mentioned fear, you mentioned lots of things, but apart from that, was there anything else that you found pretty, like, you know, you felt strongly?
Well, yeah, I mean, psychologically, there was a great deal of, and not to underestimate, this great deal of, you know, powerlessness, which is a really, because I was only little and I couldn't do anything. And when you feel, there's a feeling of being trapped, a feeling of being powerless, a feeling of isolation, and then a big loss of trust in people that you love and people that are supposed to be looking after you. So I couldn't have put those words around the experience when I was in my early teens, but you know, as I've got older, you know, I realized that, you know, not being able to own my own emotions, because I was feeling whatever he was feeling. Therefore, there was an element of, what about my feelings? What are they? I don't even know what they are. I don't know even how to relate to my own feelings, because I can't actually, I've never really been there. I've never had the space to express my own feelings. So not being able to express my feelings, feeling powerless is a terrible thing. Feeling isolated is a terrible thing. And, you know, just this not knowing and feeling really trapped. Psychologically, they are things that you take with you, you know, into your adult life.
Yeah. And during this whole process, Mary, did you ever blame yourself? Did you ever feel that maybe there is something I can do to help or change the situation? Or maybe if I do as I'm told, maybe the perpetrator will stop doing this?
Well, I realised with hindsight, I had two brothers, by the way. Now, my two brothers were older than me, and being boys, they would generally take themselves out the house and disappear, which was a lot harder for me to do. So they had sort of strategies to try and get out of the way. And neither of them really, they wouldn't mind me saying that, you know, they didn't really do a great deal at school. They rebelled quite a lot.
Yeah, because it would impact your education as a child, because you won't be able to focus if you're always on the edge and scared and anxious. It does affect the child's development.
Yeah, and then what I did was I then tried to be Little Miss Perfect, if you like. So I tried to be, if the boys weren't going to do something to make my dad happy, maybe I could do something. So I would, I would agree to sing in church, and we'd all go to church, and I would be singing in church, and I would try and do well. I wasn't a star pupil, but I would try and have a good report, and I would try and do everything to say, if I could make my dad happy, more happy, if I could make him proud of me, maybe that would make a difference. And I kept trying to do that right the way through to the age of 40, when I actually went back to university and did my MA in management learning, and I went to my graduation ceremony and took my mum and dad with me and my daughter. And even on that day, my dad created a scene, and I ended up spoiling my whole day. So even at the age of 40, I couldn't do anything to change the circumstances.
You mentioned that certain things followed you into adulthood. Do you think childhood trauma has a tendency to kind of follow you throughout your life, and it impacts you and your behavior? For example, some people become people pleasers because they feel if they do everything for everyone, they will be kind of, they'll be in the best behavior with you, and there won't be any shouting or arguments or conflict. And in order to avoid that, even if it means compromising on your own well-being, you tend to still say yes to everyone, and you just find it difficult to say no or set healthy boundaries.
Yeah, I'm absolutely sure that it affects you in your adult life. And if I guess what's it done for me, I had a real desperate fear of being trapped in the way that my mum was trapped. She didn't have a job and money, so she was very dependent. And the way that I sort of dealt with that in my own life was to very quickly become independent, and then become overly independent. So there is an element of not relying on anybody for anything, and that is a really, that's a difficult way to live your life. And but it's also, that whole lack of trust. And in the age of 32, after I'd had my daughter, I decided I didn't want to be married anymore, and I decided I didn't want to be in. I felt trapped, even although I wasn't trapped. I had a good husband, but I decided I didn't want to be married, and so I left my husband at the age of 32, and I've never married again. So there's an element of me that I wouldn't go back into a relationship, if you like. And I don't think that would have happened. I think that if I hadn't have grown up, I think if I'd have grown up in a happy family, I would have a different mindset.
Of course.
But now I sort of feel that I want to be alone. I like to be alone. And I trust myself, but I don't trust other people to get too close to me, if you like. Now, I mean, I've learned to adapt to that. That's probably pretty extreme, but I know that is my preferred. That's my preferred modus operandi, but it's not a very, I realize it's not a very healthy one. But part of, coming from that background, if you like.
Did you ever question your mother? Why is she staying in this relationship? Why doesn't she leave? Did you ever question her or blame her?
Well, I realized, when I was younger, that she had no money, and she had 3 children, and she had nowhere to go. So, and there's a lot of women out there right now who will relate to that, and that is a really, really terrible situation to find yourself in. I guess what became very tiring in the end and disappointing for me was that, you know, as my mother got older, my dad really didn't change a great deal. And I was working, you know, and I had money and I had a home and I had a husband and then I had a child, and I would have supported her. And I wanted her, you know, to leave him, to set out on her own. And at one point she did leave. And we lived away from him for about 12 months. But, you know, the usual predator thing is that, you know, he came back and he was sorry. And, you know, he realized what he'd done and he'd never do it again. And she actually went back. I didn't. I stayed out of the family home. I decided I wouldn't go back. But I worried about my mum constantly. And, you know, my mum and I talked about it a lot during, as we both sort of matured, I guess. And, you know, in the end, I guess the thing that I want to say to other women is that, you know, my mum ended up becoming bitter, angry, resentful, and she turned to alcohol in order to sort of sedate her everyday, you know,
numb
existence.
The pain.
And yet, you know, by then she had no energy left to actually leave this man. So she pretty much, you know, gave up her whole life. And you know, things don't get better. Very often when you marry or find a man that is that way inclined, it doesn't often, we might wish it to get better, but it doesn't often get better over time.
That's a very important point that you have made, Mary, that lots of victims, they tend to stay with the perpetrator because they keep hoping that this person is going to change. And nobody changes unless they really want to, because there is no remorse, there's no guilt. Most often people who engage themselves in this kind of aggressive violent behavior or coercive control, they don't acknowledge that there is a problem with them. And there's this, you know, this whole phase where they apologize, the so-called apology, and then they get the victim back. And this is why we see that often women, they come back to their you know, violent partners or husbands, and lots of refuges. They are full of women who keep on coming back and forth because they don't find the courage to kind of leave or to comprehend that what's happening, it's not going to stop. In fact, it's going to get from bad to worse.
I you know, unless I think if women know, and one of the things you know, a message I really wanted to send to my daughter was that, you know in your bones when something's not right. And, you know, when you meet that man for the very first time, you know, there's a period of like a honeymoon period, if you like, but then there is a period where if you start to pick up signals that things don't seem right, it's your head doesn't really want to go there because you think that you've found a new relationship, but sometimes your gut is telling you something that is not quite right, and there's behaviors and words and actions that you sort of think, that's a bit, you know, I'm not sure about that. And I think it's that thing I want to say to a lot of women is, you know, trust your intuition, and if you pick up signals early on, and I wished my mum had responded to signals she had early on, that, you know, her life could have been different if she'd have acted on things that she knew when she was a much younger woman.
Could you share a few examples of these signals that you're referring to?
You know, there's, and I mean, I've had, you know, in relationships that I've been in since I've been divorced, you know, signals, things like when you sort of get a feeling that somebody is lying to you, you know, maybe telling you that they've been doing something, and then a few days later there's a slightly different story, and you start to sort of get this sense of things that you're hearing don't quite add up. and stories that you're being told about maybe an ex-relationship, that it's all over, and then something else happens that gives you the feeling that, you know, maybe the ex is back around somewhere. It's a very strange thing, but it's in the ether, and it's not that you have any firm evidence, and it's also not about being paranoid, but there is something that, you know, when you're interacting with somebody, that things that don't quite come together, it happens. I find there's something in my body telling me that there's a little red flag here somewhere, but being able to try, I think what I did, and what we tend to do is we go, no, you're just, you know, that's not true, you're just making that up, and that, you know, you're sort of just thinking, no, that's I'm just being a bit paranoid. But and it can be, but very often when we get those red flag signals, they're worth just holding on to, and sort of not ignoring them.
So instead of gaslighting yourself and trying to justify somebody else's behavior, you suggest that people should listen to their gut feeling and trust their intuition. Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. And you know, how many women, if the amount of women that I know that, you know, said, I knew within weeks, I knew within months, or I knew within a year, and I knew. There's no doubt about it. There is very few women that will say to you that are in abusive relationships that the very first signal they got was not a very, very long time ago in relation to, you know, their time with that partner.
But they just choose to ignore.
Yeah, you know, we do.
Why do you think that happens? Why ignore? Why not trust your instincts and run?
Well, you know, we want to be loved, don't we? And we want to believe, and we want to believe that we're special, and we want to meet the man of our dreams, and, you know, and we want to believe, because usually there's an awful lot of, you know, very positive stuff that you will get, that, you know, the perpetrator is very good at drawing you into a relationship. And making you feel like you're the most important person on the planet. So you get a lot of that will come in the early stages of a relationship. And then when it starts to turn, you know, there is that little bit, no, not really. I remember all these good bits. But the good bits start to become, you know, less and less, if you like.
So you would say there is no consistency in terms of the behavior and the actions and the words that are spoken. So you say one thing, like you mentioned earlier on, but your behavior and your actions speak otherwise. So there's no consistency.
Yeah, in the book, and it's a very short memoir, but in the book I actually talk about the story of Bluebeard, and if anybody's interested in reading the short memoir, and if anybody knows about Bluebeard, then that is a really good story for women today, and that was written years and years and years ago, but you know, it's a really good story of staying with somebody who is an abuser, and how in the end, you know, they will destroy you, you know. You know, they will destroy you as a person.
That's their ultimate objective, isn't it?
Well, it's control. I mean, they might not think they're destroying you, but with all of the control that they bring to bear, they destroy you as, you know, as a fully functioning person, really, because you know, you start to doubt yourself, you start to lose your confidence, you start to question yourself, you start to think you're becoming paranoid. You start to become very fearful, and all of those things aren't the way that women should be living their lives. I mean, or anybody should be living their lives.
Do you think they're aware of this, the perpetrators? Do they realize, do they know that what they're doing is hurting someone?
Well, I did wonder, about when I wrote these poems, I wondered about whether if I'd have read those to my father, I mean, obviously they weren't written at the time, but like in court at the moment, there is often a victim statement, isn't there, that is read out because they want the perpetrator to know what it was like for the victim. And I wondered whether if we were able, and particularly children, because I don't think anybody, we think about the woman, for sure we do, because it's often the woman that is going to be most seriously hurt or damaged. But the children end up being very innocent in this. And the children have feelings and obviously go on then, these feelings they take with them into their adult life. I mean, I wondered, can I just read you another short poem?
Yeah, please go ahead.
So this is bit is called Life. And I just wondered if you think about what if I did read this to my dad at the time, or in my teens or in my 20s, I wonder how he would have responded. And it would be really interesting, to any men out there, if they were hearing this from their own child, how would that make them feel? So the nightmare didn't leave at dawn, it followed us, it lingered on. Morning came with nerves on fire, guts were churning, tense like wire. We were not living normal lives, we lived with threats of guns and knives. We woke up to another day, to work and school we made our way. We smiled and went on normally, our colleagues, friends, what did they see? How could we share what they don't know? We live at home with deadly foe. Spending time with other folks to hear them laugh and tell some jokes. They look so happy, I'm not one. I'm primed for danger, not for fun. Reflecting now, it seems so sad, a children's party never had. To celebrate my little life, how could it be amidst the strife? I'd never thought of this before until I looked behind the door. It's taken 50 years, it seems, to recognise these broken dreams. And I sort of, I often think here when I read about colleagues, I went to work every day and did my job, and my colleagues, how could I possibly tell my colleagues that I was, I'd spent the night locked in the bedroom with my mum, with my dad terrorizing us. I mean, it isn't something that you could share. And yet, when colleagues have read the book or since read the book, they've been very, very, well, they've been upset because they wished they had known and they wished that they could have helped. But of course I didn't do anything. But, if you were a man hearing, the first poem and hearing this one, what it really felt like on a daily basis, I wonder whether it would make you think twice about, am I really doing this to people that I love?
Yeah. So what key insights did you discover in writing this book, and if you would like to share with all the women who are watching right now?
Yeah, so the sort of one of the strap lines in the book is that truth is freedom. And I felt that, going back inside myself and finding my inner child and telling the truth about my childhood and how it felt, that was the way for me to get free of the past and be able to talk about it. And for women everywhere, truth, there are three things. One is, we have to look behind the door of our resistance, because it is what we were talking about, Orissa, which is where we are resisting what we know. And when you know what you know, you've got to see it clearly, and you've got to tell yourself the truth, however difficult that is. The courage to be able to say, this isn't working, this person is not good for me, and is going to be a damage to my well-being going forward. So truth is freedom, because if you tell yourself the truth, if you accept your reality, then I'm not suggesting that it's easy, but it is the way to empower yourself to make other choices. Those other choices might be things you can do for yourself, but also reach out for help. There is plenty of help out there that you can you can find, because there are lots of caring organizations and people.
Yeah, especially during this pandemic, now that we have seen a sudden increase in cases of domestic abuse, not just amongst women, but even men. And men tend to not report it as much as women do because of shame and guilt and embarrassment.
For sure.
But there are, like you said, plenty of organizations out there who are more than happy to provide support, legal guidance, refuge for women who are unsure of where to go. Because like you mentioned, most victims, they tend to stay with the perpetrator because of financial dependence. And I think that's one of the ways to control the victim, to make them dependent on you in every way possible. And it kind of keeps them locked in captivity, as you may call it.
Well, you know, that's a good point around, you know, I know that, you know, today it didn't happen to my mum, but I know that today women are being encouraged to take out loans, you know, and are being asked to sign papers, loans for this and loans for that, which, you know, the man isn't signing, but then that means the woman's locked into that. And I think those are some of the signals, Warissa. You know, if you're being asked to do something that doesn't sort of make sense, if you were in a partnership, why would we do this? If you start to see those things happening, these are ways of controlling you. And, you know, these are the things to avoid at all cost, really, because once you're financially dependent, then you're in real difficulty.
Yes, especially with young children or children with disability involved, that could create even more challenges for the victim. You have one final poem of encouragement. Would you like to share something from that?
Yeah, so this was when I got to the end, because it, you know, it sounds like a sad tale, and you know, I do feel personally empowered, and I want women to feel empowered. So my final poem was, to all the women, children too, to any men who feel like you, for those who've met the predator, this is your life, you must seek more. Forgive yourself, don't take the blame. It's not your fault, so don't feel shame. Your life depends on what you do in making choices, following through. Don't worry what the others think, that in your judgment you will sink. This makes you captive of your mind. This is the way to stay confined. So if you want to fly and soar, it's time to look behind the door. See what's there with clarity, as only truth will set you free.
That's amazing. Really powerful, inspiring, truly inspiring. Thank you for sharing that. Where can we find the book? I mean, if somebody's interested in reading and buying it for a friend, maybe.
Yeah, so the book's called The Song of Truth, and it's a very, very short memoir. It's only about 50 pages. You can get it for under £1 on Amazon. It's available to download. It's available on Lulu, and you can also order it in a hard copy. I was delighted to say that I made the book available for free in October last year for Domestic Awareness Month. And so people could download it from my website, and I asked them to make a contribution to Solace Women's Aid. And I raised over £700 for Solace Women's Aid by making the book available. And then what I've done now is I've just taken the poems out separately and created a short book just of the poems, and I'm going to load that up onto my website, which is marywride.com. And if people would like a copy of the poems, then they can reach me through my website, and I'm very happy to send the document on. It's quite a large document. It'd probably have to be on like Google Drive or something, but I can send the document over if people would like to read it. And also I'd love to hear from any women, men, any comments at all. I'd be delighted to hear from you.
You also work as a coach. So how can you help someone who is currently in an abusive or toxic relationship or is a victim of coercive control?
Well, Marissa, I mean, my coaching has tended to be very much in the professional field. And I think there are people who are better placed than me to actually help women who are in need of help, if you like, that need maybe a safe place to go, but I am available in terms of general advice, general listening. I'm a woman, and I care about the lives of other women. I would, if you need help, then please reach out. And in the book, in the back of the Song of Truth, I have a whole list of numbers and places where people can seek help. And I do know there's a lot of help that people, and the starting point is to reach out. And if people want to reach out and start a conversation with me, then I'm very happy to do that.
Can you show the cover of the book?
So the cover of the book is so this is the Song of Truth. Yeah. And not a very big volume, but it's quite a quirky. There's quite a quirky story in there about how I actually came and found that sort of went through the journey of finding my inner child.
If I could ask you, what helped you most in healing? In finding peace and contentment within yourself, what helped you most?
Just being honest with myself. So I'd been protecting myself for all of these years, and just allowing myself to know that I would be okay. For people that are listening out there that have had maybe a difficult past and have put it to one side, lots of us feel that if we open that door, we'll go under, we won't be able to cope, we'll be overwhelmed, we'll be, it's a real fear that if I go there, this isn't gonna end well. And I am a sort of a survivor of sort of saying, you can go there, trust yourself to go there. There's a great poet called David White, and he said, it was a comment that he made was, do you have the courage to walk back into your wounded body? And this idea of, we have a wounded body, and could you walk back into it and actually be kind to that wounded body? And I think if we can go back in and be kind to ourselves, and also, the poems and the writing, whatever works for you, find a way of being able to express what's going on inside you. It could be, more latterly, I've been doing painting and various other things, but find a way of allowing those wounds and that past to be healed, maybe through some more creative endeavor. It won't get healed through your head. You won't be able to heal yourself in your mind, because your mind's too strategic and too rational and too protective. Find a way of allowing feelings to emerge and capture them in some other way. And I feel that creativity, writing, the story, the poems, and some additional sort of crafts I've been doing, those were very healing. Those allowed me the space to get in touch with quite vulnerable parts of myself.
In fact, lots of therapists, they tend to use poetry therapy and art therapy to help the victims and survivors to kind of heal from the trauma they have experienced in their childhood.
You have to sort of take yourself out of your head. It's around, how can I just take myself away from my mind, and how can I just let things speak and emerge? And you know, that's and I guess busyness, if we stay busy, which we do in our lives, that's a great way of protecting ourselves. And sometimes we have to stop and we have to be more reflective, and you know, allow other things to speak to us.
And that can have a very therapeutic effect on your body and mind, right? Any final message you would like to give to our audience today? Any piece of advice?
You know, I think it's just be kind to one another. You know, if you've got whoever's listening in, we're all in relationship with somebody, whether it's friends or, you know, more intimate partners. And please be kind to one another and add value to one another's lives. And if you are in, you know, relationship with a friend and or a partner who isn't kind to you and who isn't adding value to your life, then, you know, think about whether that is something that you want to nurture and protect. So, you know, our relationships are so important. Make sure that you're in a good relationship and that you're doing your part to respect and value other people.
Thank you. You know, some studies indicate that children who have been abused, they often become abusers themselves in adulthood. What would you like to say about that?
Do you know, I mean, I'm not surprised, because I think that, you know, people learn from their parents around how to be or how not to be, for example. But if I take my two brothers, both of them had a tendency towards violence. Now, not violence towards women, but in their teenage years, they would both admit that they would be quick to violence. Now, that's because that was something they'd seen in the home. So why wouldn't they do that outside? And also in my brothers, I noticed, you know, elements of sort of words and behaviors and facial expressions that were very similar to, I was very sort of aware of them, very similar to those of my father, in a way that were, without saying anything, have quite a controlling effect. And then from my part, I went sort of, so neither of my brothers have been abusive in any way, but they do learn, and I could see them learning elements of my father's behavior. For me, I learned to not be like my mum, sadly. You know, I loved my mum, she was beautiful, but I was not going to be dependent. I was not going to be compliant. You know, so I learned, so we learn from our parents. So yes, I'm sure that, you know, there are people, men and women, who go on to be abusers because they grew up in an abusive relationship, and, you know, we mustn't contribute to that, any of us.
And do you think this is one of the reasons why women who have younger children should really think about you know, isolating their children from such an environment, because this will have a really negative impact on their children, and in their adulthood they could maybe develop a kind of personality which is similar to the perpetrator?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of women will say that, you know, we stay together for the children, but I don't think there's many children that you could go back and talk to that would say, I wanted you to stay in that abusive relationship because it was better for me. You know, at the time it might seem painful, but our children they don't deserve. We don't, you know, my mum would have no idea the amount of fear that me and my brothers lived in. She would be so worried about her own survival. She would be worried about us, but she would be so worried about her own survival. She wouldn't be thinking that how we were experiencing it. And therefore, you know, don't underestimate the real damage it's doing to your children. And don't stay, because if there's any way at all that you can remove children from that environment, first remove yourself, take responsibility for yourself, and then take responsibility for your children, because it's just not healthy to stay in an abusive relationship.
In fact, we have plenty of studies out there that kind of prove that even when a woman is pregnant and during pregnancy, if she is subjected to any kind of trauma, and by trauma I mean coercive control or abuse of any kind, and even neglect, even that has a negative impact on the developing fetus, and the child or the baby born will show signs of trauma, which goes up into adulthood, and that's quite scary to know.
Yeah.
So like you said, it does more harm than good by making the children witness all of that. And
and I don't know, Marissa, whether we really have thought enough about the children, because we do think about the women, and we currently are talking about women, and during domestic violence or abuse awareness month, a lot of it is about the women, and quite rightly so, but children's voices, I think, are seldom heard. And that's why in the poems, I wanted to speak from that child and say what it was like to lie in bed and be a child, and how that felt. And that's good for other women to see, and it's good for other men to read and understand, and we need to hear more children's voices.
Definitely.
Because there's quite a bit about the trauma affecting children's brain development, around it does have a huge impact on how they adjust to grown-up life.
Do you think it had any kind of impact on your relationship with your child when you had your daughter?
Well, when I had my daughter, I actually suffered from postnatal depression, and it wasn't just a sort of initial spurt, but I started to then feel quite seriously depressed, rather than just baby blues. It really did get into the postnatal depression, and I know now that a lot of that was that I was completely emotionally overwhelmed at that time, and I just wasn't equipped because of my past. And having no one to rely on, really, I just wasn't equipped for what was happening to me emotionally, because I hadn't really allowed any of my emotions to get in the way of my life up until really having my daughter. And then the whole emotional explosion, if you like, of having a baby just floored me completely. And therefore it took me a while to settle into being a mum. But I have been, I love my daughter dearly. She lives on the other side of the world. She's in Australia, and I dedicated the book to her because I wanted to pass on what I think all women should pass on, is that the wisdom we have in our bones, the things we know, rather than just writing ourselves off as we get older. It's important that we pass on what we can as a cautionary tale. Not that this is going to happen to everybody, but just passing on some wisdom. So now I have a great relationship with my daughter, and I'm so happy to have a daughter, and she's the love of my life. And I wish her well in her future relationships, for sure.
Did you ever go for therapy or counseling when you were suffering from postnatal depression, or was it something that you managed yourself?
Well, the health visitor suggested that, after a few months that I needed to go to the doctor. So I went to the doctor, and the doctor prescribed me some tablets, which I really didn't want to take. But, I knew that I had to take them in order to try and fight my way back. And the thing that saved me really was work, and going back to work and getting back into some sort of control of my life. And it's also something that I think I was thinking about during the COVID pandemic, is that a lot of what makes some of these difficult relationships almost manageable is that you are out the house, in work, with colleagues, doing a job that you feel good about, talking to colleagues that you have a good relationship with, sharing maybe some stuff that's going on, and then you can go home in the evening, and not in an abusive sense, but, you know, we need our own space, and we need our own friends, and we need our own purpose.
Of course.
And I think that when all of that is stripped away from women or men, then, you know, that I think made it difficult during the lockdown periods for women that had no real escape
interaction
from.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mary. I absolutely love the work that you have done, and it's truly, truly inspiring. And I highly, highly recommend everyone who's watching this program right now, if you could get a copy of Mary's book, please go for it. It would be a lovely gift for any of your friends or sister or anyone you know who may be a victim of domestic abuse. Next week, next Saturday, we'll join you again with another brilliant guest and a topic that would be related to your mental health and psychological well-being. Till then, look after yourselves, especially your mental health. Assalamu alaikum, rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.